What's up? Welcome back to this edition of the Seats to Streets podcast. I am your host, J.R. Horn, and that guy over there is Brian Gorman. And if you're new to the channel or new to the podcast, we are your mobilization mentors, your church coaches that want to see you equipped with every tool you need to move your people from Sunday morning seats to local and global streets. And a part of that is this regular podcast where we can have a conversation about what's going on in our world and how we can equip you, or even just have the conversations that need to take place that we all need to be a part of to continue to move us forward in what we're doing to make disciples. So this one's a little different. This is a different type episode of podcast where we really don't have a script. We kind of picked a topic and said, hey, let's kind of figure it out together live and think out loud and invite you into that process. So today we're going to tackle that type of topic. It's one that I asked Brian earlier. I'm like, here's what I want to talk about off camera when we weren't recording. And he's like, I don't know if I have a lot of good things or positive things to say about that. But I said, yeah, then let's do it together on camera. Why not record it and put it out for the entire interwebs to see? So there you go. That's the difference in our personalities.
Oh, I don't mind doing it. I just don't know. When you talked about what you want to talk about, I know what my answer would be. And I think that's maybe where the differences will be. Not that I think it's bad. I think actually the answer that I would give really speaks to everything we've talked about when it comes to culture and focus. Yep. and the kind of things that we do as a church and how we function. And I'm not saying that our way to do it is the right way, but I think it's fair to say this is a way to answer the question. So sure. Why don't we let's start with the question, because I think it's interesting what you're bringing up.
So here's what I'm wrestling with. When we look at things going on in our world today, and we look at some of the big global issues, or maybe global disasters, or things that are going on in our world that we would like to impact or be a part of the solution, but we struggle to know where to start. So, for instance, the missionaries that are still currently being held hostage in Haiti. We're half a world away. How does a church in Wisconsin, how does a church in Louisville, Kentucky, go about impacting that? What is our role in that? We've just seen, what is it, with 3 or 4 months now removed from the United States, completely pulling the military out of Kabul, Afghanistan, and completely outside of that. What does that look like? There are believers, there are churches in Afghanistan, specifically even in Kabul, that have been displaced because of their villages being torn down. How does a church in the States, how does our congregation help out with that? What does that look like? I mean, currently we've got Russia posturing right now on the Ukrainian border. What could that turn into? I mean, that could turn into another war. So the question I have is, how can we help? What does help look like?
So let me share some pitfalls that I'm thinking as you're bringing all of this up. And I just think it's things that we all need to be considering in the process of the question, of how you answer the question. Because for some people, natural inclination is to kind of pop off and kind of roll out some answers. But I think we need to address some potential pitfalls to the question. And that is, in our current climate, everything is seen as a political war. Mm-hmm. And so any answer you give is through some eyes going to be received immediately. If you answer, especially if you answer in a public forum, is going to be received as though you're aligning behind some sort of political statement or political issue. So, for example, the stuff that's going on out of Jerusalem and in Israel right now, right, with the Palestinians and Gaza, and how all that's playing out and how that's impacting Christians in the midst of that environment, that whichever side you fall on that, for some people, that's a bit of a dog whistle moment. So you've got some issues there. You've got some issues and pitfalls in the fact that because some of these problems are sort of brand new, at least brand new into our world, into some of the things that we're trying to work through, the resources and networks may not be there for you to know, like, where are the safe places to give a quick answer on. Mm-hmm. So I think there's some components and some potential pitfalls there. And then, as always, we always want to be at least taking into consideration. I'm not saying this would start or stop. I'm just saying take into consideration do the organizations that we could partner with, do they align with us when it comes to some key theologies? Do they align with you in relation to some of the focus and cultural values that your organization has that we've been talking about for a while? And so those are some of the pitfalls I see, or some things that I would want to like, wait, I want to think about before I reply, because my gut instinct reply might actually set me up to walk into a political landmine, walk into some sort of financial landmine, to go, oh, I didn't realize this was what they were doing. Some theological landmines. So those are some that come to mind for me. For when that's in front of you, what are some of the maybe concerns that you're seeing that churches would need to be aware of?
Well, I think that oftentimes I get these questions from pastors, from ministerial staff, those that are connected to missions or connected to ministry in a much higher level than the average individual of the congregation. And one of the ways I try to help pastors process through this is they have this heart, like, how do we help? What do we do when the U.S. was pulling out of Afghanistan? My phone's blowing up to say, how can we help? What can we do? Because we're a global organization. Our organization could physically and monetarily impact what's going on. And so they're asking, what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? And they're using we as a voice box of the congregation.
Right.
And I think one of the pitfalls that most pastors run into is when they get smacked in the face that their congregation may not have that same enthusiasm or vigor to help that they do. And so when you step up and say, as a pastor, how can we help? Your congregation may not be there yet. They may not be to the spiritual level of, we have to help right now. They may be to the point where you have to endear them to what is going on. I think that's a major pitfall, Brian, that we do have to think soberly about, of that our congregation may not be to that level or on that same perch that we are when we're trying to jump in and be a part of a solution or part of aid or part of care when we see things going on in our world. I mean,
it's interesting you hear it that way, because I heard it on the exact opposite side. So you hear it as though, oh, as pastor, I've got this concern because I've seen this thing in the news. I know about the martyrdom that's going on. I know that what's going on in different areas. And I read about these things personally, somewhat regularly. And yet I rarely move that way. Oftentimes when those questions come to me, it's because someone in my congregation has this deep passion for this community, or something they've seen in the news or something they've read, where they're coming to me asking that, at which point, I heard a phrase years ago, and it's just always kind of stuck with me, that when someone asks you a question that you're not ready for, think about it as though you're trying to catch a giant medicine ball, right? If you ever gone to the gym and they have the medicine balls you'd work out with, right? There's the little ones you can use, but there's some of those really big ones. And if you just try to stand there and boom, catch that ball, man, it's going to tear shoulders. It's going to tear everything up. And the only way to receive that ball is actually kind of take a step back and let it come into you, and give a little with it. And so in my mind, the thought of being able to say, wow, thank you so much for that heart. Thank you so much for that passion. I don't have a great answer for you yet. Can I get back with you in a week and then I'm going to be calling you and making some of those. So if you're in that situation where you're getting hit with something you don't know, especially pastors, we have this desire to be able to feel like we've always got the answer, but I think that we always have to be careful, again, because some of these pitfalls. Receive questions like a medicine ball. Even if you do have an answer, it's usually a pretty good practice to step back, immediately kind of catch and receive, to be able to go, hey, that's a great question. Thanks so much for the question. It sounds like what you're asking is this, and what you're doing is you're giving yourself a minute for your brain to catch up. It's just a good that's a technique for other purposes, but in this situation, that's my first thought, is I don't want to get completely caught off guard or misconstrued what they're saying. But I would be quick to step away from the question and go, hey, I don't want to answer that one yet. Give me a little bit to think about it, unless it's a community I know very well, or unless I've got a friend who's already in that community who I could reach out to go, best answer for this. Like a while back, we had a situation where with some of the stuff that had been taking place in Houston, with a lot of the flooding and things that were taking place there, I have a good friend who's a minister in that area. And so even though his church is not connected to our church, originally we were trying to figure out how do we partner there specifically. And so we just put up, here's a contact to a personal friend of mine. If you want to participate either by going or by giving, here's the contact information. We put it up on the screen. We posted it out, put it online. you contact that number directly. And in a lot of ways, it kind of answers that concern that you brought up. And that is, it might be a personal thing that the pastor has this passion for, or it might be a personal passion of someone within your congregation. So something that you may consider doing is present some opportunities, but not a church plan. Is one of the things that I'm sitting there thinking, is to be able to go, if you want to get involved with it, here's how. If you don't, but we want to provide you with the resource if you want to. This isn't something the church is going to do a big drive for, but it is something we want you to be aware. And so that might be, for our church specifically, that would be one of the specific ways we would go about it, rather than kind of doing a, hey, everybody, we're packing up the the RV and driving it to wherever this thing is. We'd be much more inclined to say, hey, we know of this partnership that we have in the area, or this organization. If you give to this organization or reach out through this website, you'll find the place to get the information you want to have to give to what you want to give to. Right. And then I'm not sort of putting the church on the line. So,
yeah, I would even add to that the idea of having an opportunity to learn and to understand what's going on. Many times we fall into the same trap. If we don't physically go actively look for updates on what is going on, we could think that it's been resolved or that it's a non-issue.
Yeah.
I haven't heard anything in the news about Afghanistan in a long time, but what we do know from the Christian ministry circles, that there's still 100,000 people that are still in Kabul that need just food and water. And so what does it look like to be able to care for them in such a way that we would be fulfilling of the second greatest commandment, is to love our neighbor as ourselves? What does that look like? I think one of the biggest things we can do is just to have the ability to continue to offer ways of learning and putting it in front of our people that this is still going on. The latest updates a couple days ago, where they had just released 2 more hostages down in Haiti, and that's still somewhere around 9 or 10 still in captivity. That if we don't, if at the rate that the news comes and goes, we can be lost at the fact that this is still taking place, and that there are individuals that are still in captivity with no known update on how they're doing, or even if they're alive, and that this is still taking place. So I think one of the things that most churches want to do, and that's the easiest thing to do, is how can I pray and how can I give? And we don't want to deter anyone from doing any of those things.
Right.
Prayer is the number one way to drive missionaries out of the field. Jesus says it clearly in Matthew 9. The number one way to putting harvest workers into the harvest field is to beg the Lord of the harvest to drive out workers into the harvest field. We're not deterring anything about prayer. Focused prayer absolutely massively works. But is there ways to help, to progress, to grow our congregation, to make disciples and make disciples, to be able to respond in greater ways than just only prayer and only giving? And I would say yes. And one of those ways is consistently putting this in front of our people. Guys, ladies, this is still taking place. We still have to be praying. We still have to be understanding that the evil one is still in possession of the earth and still active. And this is kind of his playground. And so I think the knowledge part of it and the learning opportunity to learn is a huge one when you come to that kind of buffet of ways of helping out that you were describing.
Well, that brings up sort of 2 thoughts to me then. One thought is that an option for some churches might be to make it so that you are regularly sharing what's going on around the world. It's just part of your common teaching, or part of your common prayer time, is to be able to find, looking for things. And there's websites and blogs that'll help you do this, so that every week or every other week you're coming in with a different concern that you as a church are spending time in prayer for. That's one option. Now, I will tell you, that wouldn't be an option that our church would choose, because we'd prefer to have more focus. But it might be a really great option for your church, especially if you have a whole church of deep prayer people. That'd be a great way to do it. But an alternative that makes me consider, based on what you're saying, is that if you're going to take on a cause, take it on until it's done. Because like we talked about, the news cycle is so fast that every 2 days there's a new thing to be outraged and concerned about. Meanwhile, people are still imprisoned. Meanwhile, people are still displaced. Meanwhile, buildings are still being blown up. And so if we aren't staying focused, that week after week we're working toward completion of this, we're going to let some people down. And what really stands out in my mind is something that happened very early in my senior ministry time. And that is, I'd only been in the ministry about 3 years, at least full-time ministry about 3 years. And I had just got done doing the funeral for this 5-year-old girl. And after the funeral and after the meal and after all the things, the only people left at the building were my wife and I and the mom and dad of this little girl. And everybody else, the family and friends, had all left. And we're just standing around talking. And the husband looked at me, father looked at me, and he goes, "Brian, is this when everybody stops calling?"
Hmm.
And I would love to tell him no.
Right.
But I'm also not really good at lying. And so I had to just say, like, honestly, yes. For everyone else, this is over because they don't have to go home to her room.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have to think about the graduation of her best friends. They don't have to think about, when her best friends grow up and go to college or get married and they don't have to think about those things, but it will always be this reminder to you. And so it's not going to have that same impact. They've had closure today.
Yeah.
You haven't. And so that phrase is just really, it's rung in my mind ever since. Is this when people stop calling? And I think what can happen with the news cycle, the way it is we're so quick to, oh man, we've got to get on that. And we give money and then people stop calling because we don't stay focused. So I would say stay focused. And that's just one of those things for me. So, all right, JR, let me ask you this. You're the senior minister of Horn Christian Church there. And, it's an old family church.
Right.
Been there for a long time.
Fictitious, by the way.
Right.
I would never name a church after myself.
No.
More than once.
Oh, I have seen that. That's sad. Either way, let's say that occurs and someone comes to you and, hey, JR, we just got done hearing about all of the, the paper mache shortage that's now taking place in Louisiana. However, are we going to deal with the paper mache shortage? And because of that, and especially, and maybe if you haven't heard, there's the massive flannel graph shortage in the Seattle area. Churches everywhere are in disarray. Man. How can we help with the flannel graph issue? What kind of answer are you giving to that? If you're senior minister, if you're lead minister?
I think one of the things that I'm going to tell you how I would approach it. One of the things that we fall into trouble with, most pastors fall into trouble with, is that you think you have to give an answer right then.
Right.
Piggybacking off your catching the medicine ball, you don't have to give an answer then. Oftentimes, if you give the answer that this individual or this group doesn't want to hear, you got a lot of issues on your hands. One, because you haven't taken the time to figure out why they're passionate about the flannel graph shortage.
Right.
And we don't want to make light of anything that's going on in our world today by calling it flannel graph shortage or paper mache. We're just using fictitious terms just because it's just easier to talk about that instead of, what's going on in the world today. But yeah, I want to know why. Like, why are you passionate? Why are you moved by that? Is there something that has connected you to that?
Yeah, I just know for me growing up as a child, if it hadn't been for the flannel graphs, that I don't know if my relationship with Jesus would be as close as it is if it hadn't been for the flannel graphs. And for these kids in those communities to not be able to have that, I can only imagine how that might be hindering the future of their spiritual development. And as a church that's deeply concerned about the spiritual development of children, just really, it's on my heart that we should do something about that.
You're absolutely right. The spiritual progression and the spiritual relationship and the connection that individuals have with our Lord and Savior is absolutely on the top of our list. That's why, as a church, we are committed to making disciples who make disciples. And I know that you've been able to hear about Jesus, learn about the stories of the Bible through flannel graph, and I'm super excited for that. I'd love to sit with you to figure out what that looks like for you to be involved. And I'm going to make sure that we are still living out that same desire that you have in our current missions partners of making disciples who make disciples, because I'm glad that you have that same passion that we have as a church. So you want to come in one day this week, and let's look at how you can be involved in that. And I'd love to be able to give you guidance on what that would look like.
Yeah. So I think, an answer for me from that would be very similar to that, although I'd be a little more inclined to go that as a church, I don't believe we're going to be doing anything about that. because we're trying to stay so focused on these 5 things that we have as a church that we're passionate about. And I'd go through those. Uh, and um, and we know that all of these things are a big deal, but if we lose our focus, we stand the chance of not making the kind of impact we can make in these other issues. So that would be a very likely answer from me. But if I thought it fit within one of them, I might be inclined to say, hey, that's a great question. I'm going to send that back to our compassion team and let them work through that. And then I'll give them your contact information so that one of the people from there can reach out to you. That might be an answer if I felt like it fit within something that we do. But I can say, pretty honestly, we'd be much more inclined to say, hey, I'll see if I can find, like just what you said, I'll see if I can find you some helpful resources on this. But as a church, it's important that we all stay focused on these things. Just like in my house, there's things that I'm passionate about and I have hobbies that I commit to. But it's important that for my family, that if I'm going to ask the whole family to get involved, it's something that we're all on the same page with, or before long we just get distracted.
You're right. We know that the relationships are key. And so to be able to continue those relationships that you have with your local missions partners and your global missions partners, and to double down and hone in on that, is where you're going to see lasting, true kingdom impact, to where it's bigger than themselves. It's not something that that they're doing because it's a finite game. It's something that we want to help them set up, and to ensure that we're in the infinite game of making disciples, and that doesn't have an end. And so we want to make sure that takes place. And so sometimes when your people walk up and say, hey, what can we do about this? It could very well fit in your core convictions and your core focuses that says we're convicted to do missions this way, and we're focused and looking at this people group or this geographical area or this cause or this missions organization to go through our missions. It very well could fit. But if it doesn't, and it's not anti-scripture, we can't stifle them. I mean, that could be something that they are just absolutely passionate about. So let me help you fulfill that. Let me help you find the resources from the circles that I may have, so that you can go apart and do that. And they may get their small group to go along with it, their life group, whatever. That's fine. But you're right. God's called our church to do something very specific in the world, and we really want to stay focused on that. But I would love to equip you with the resources for you to be able to go and make an impact where you want to see that done too.
So something that your church might want to consider, in not just in this specific event, but in general, is there are some. I know this is not what anyone else would call them. This is a Brian terminology, but I'm pretty sure there are some mutual fund mission work out there. And what I mean by that is there are organizations that do a broad spectrum of mission work. And so you may actually give to the general fund on occasion and making an organization like that, like Team Expansion, like you're going to just give to Team Expansion potentially or something like that, and say, hey, we'd like you to do something this way, let them run with it. And this is just a way that I've seen in a few places, and there's some organizations out there like that I would call mutual fund missions. Like, they're doing a lot of things under one sort of leadership, and you could find, even if you want to be able to partner with a local cause, right? Find the mission partnerships that exist there and support those that are going out and doing churches, the local church within that community. And so that's another option, that if your church doesn't do that, and yet those are the kind of things you guys are passionate about, finding an organization that is doing a variety of work, so that you can tell someone, actually, we're already partly involved in that because of these partnerships here. And so it might be something to consider if you don't have anything like that, or don't have ties to anything like that. I know at one point in some churches, depending on the kind of church and model you guys run, right? I've seen in some churches, they only support like individual missionaries,
right?
Period. And so they don't have really ties to missionary sending organizations, or missionary umbrella style, like say mutual fund style organizations, where you put money into one and it goes to a variety of things. It's just something that your church might want to consider moving forward.
That's a good one to end on, Brian, because that was going to flow into like my last point, just to be able to say, hey, if you're going to give money and you want to go to a specific cause, make sure it's going through a credible organization. Either a known missionary that you are already working with, that they've got, that they're in the area that's having the issue, or having the geographical problem, or having the war, having the the famine, the floods in Texas. Partner with a missionary you've already have a relationship with. If you're
Yeah.
already partnering there, they just build that relationship. But if you're not, find a credible organization that has the things in place that they are already going to have the high financial stewardship and care, and to make sure that it all goes to that area or that cause. I mean, remember the last think about how many times we see on the commercial, text 10 to 999999 to give to the, whatever fund. And you find out that the CEO is, taking a $6.4 million paycheck for himself, and only 30 cents from that $10 or $3 from that $10 actually makes it to the cause.
Yeah.
That's disheartening. So if you're planning to invest and to give deeply and a large amount toward any thing that's going on in our world, things that are troubling, how to help the missionaries in Haiti, how to help the believers in Afghanistan to be able to continue to grow the church, how to whatever, make sure you're going through an organization that already has a vetted process of getting your money from here in the States to the hands of the individuals that absolutely need it, because the pipeline's the problem.
Yeah.
Being able to get it to the people that need it is the problem. So make sure you're going through an organization that's already got that, and go ahead and put them on blast for a little bit. Ask them how they're going to do it. Hey, how
Yeah.
do I know that if we're going to give you $50,000 to do this, that $50,000 is going to make it? And what's that look like? So what's the process look like of getting it there? Now they're going to share with you as much as they can, obviously, because there's some of those things that you have to keep close to your chest in order to make sure that that pipeline stays, has the integrity to stay in place, so it doesn't get shut down by persecution. But they should be able to come out and say, hey, here's the things that we have in place in order to make sure that your offerings, your givings, your tithes make it to this place to go toward that solution.
Yeah, and you may have to give an answer like that to the person in your congregation who's asking you, to be able to say,
Yes.
we have yet to be able to find an organization that we believe has been good stewards. And so we don't want to just throw money at an organization or an area. We want to make sure it's going into the kind of place that we can find good stewards. And we have not found one that has been truly good stewards yet.
Mm-hmm.
When we find something, we'll be able to help with that. And so I think that's another way to kind of medicine ball that question a little bit, because it gives you that chance to go, wait till we find the right way to do this.
Right.
And I think most people will get that. Oh yeah, yeah, of course. I don't want to just throw money away. And so there's some things like that. And even when it goes to, I know a lot of times here in the States, when tragedy happens, people are like, all right, we're getting in the van and we're all going over there. I'm like, yeah, but do you know who you're going to when you get there? Like, who are you partnering with in that? And so I know there have been a few times where we've just said, hey, we know we've got some of our churches or some friends in our churches in those communities. Let me call and see if any of them right there are doing something out of their church. And you go help rebuild in that church for their work days and some things like that we've been able to do through the years. Yeah.
Awesome.
Good question, though, JR.
I hope you guys have found some benefit from this. This has really been off the cuff to go, all right, let's try a new style of podcast where we just throw a question out on the table, let it crock pot, let it sit with no preparation. So if you've found creative ways to be able to support things that are going on in the world, whether it's in your state or it's across the nation, specifically a long distance, if you've had ways where you've been able to creatively find ways to be a part of the solution and to move your people to action, leave us a comment below. If you're watching this on YouTube and you're catching this at a later date, leave us a comment below and let us know what you've been able to do. How have you moved your people into action? How have you lived out the Seats to Streets a mission, which is to give you the tools to move your people from Sunday morning seats to local and global streets? How have you mobilized them to be a part of that solution? And if you're listening to us OG on iTunes or through your car speakers or on your earbuds, through is it old school podcast now that we're on YouTube, now that we're kind of interweb famous? I don't know, Brian. I don't know how to say that. But if you're still with us on Apple and Spotify and that, we're so glad you're still with us. Give us a rating and review and let us know how much you appreciate the Seats to Streets content so we can keep on going. And if you're on YouTube, hit the like button so you can tell the YouTube algorithm that, hey, this is good and this people need to see this, and hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so that you can be able to be notified anytime we put a resource out for you. So I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of the week, and we will see you on the next episode. Take care.
Later.